Good afternoon and welcome to the 6th broadcast of Book Lovers Corner for 2019. We are being broadcast on the Wairarapa Community Access radio station, Arrow FM 92.7, every fourth Tuesday of the month, 3:30 to 4:30 throughout the year. This is one of 12 community access radio stations in New Zealand, and we are sponsored by our wonderful independent bookshop in Carterton, Elmo's Books. Thanks to, in part, Sue, who is on one of the microphones here. You can listen to our program live online by connecting with Arrow FM, or listen later via podcast, which you can download onto your device. The Book Lovers Corner is also able to be watched on Wairarapa TV, Freeview Channel 41, as well as on YouTube. So we'd appreciate any feedback you can offer by contacting the station's Facebook page. I'm Valda Kirkwood, and the other members of the team today are Gareth Rapson and Sue Lawrence. So welcome, Gareth. Welcome, Sue.
Thank you.
And we're going to start today by very quickly talking about book news and what's happening. And I think, Sue, if you would like to talk about what's, the bestsellers have been in Elmo's over the last, or this year actually.
Okay,
it's got 6 months worth now, isn't it?
Yes, I've taken the first 6 months, and there are very few surprises, actually. Best-selling fiction from us in Carterton was headed by Jack Reacher, number 23. He just sells and sells and sells. Phenomenal. And then a couple of others, notable ones that we've reviewed on this program. Eleanor Oliphant is Completely Fine, and A Gentleman in Moscow.
Oh,
and we all love both those books. For children's books, 2 New Zealand books feature. One is Old Russian Jack, written by local writer Tanya Atkinson and illustrated by the wonderful Viv Walker.
And also the name of a lovely Pinot Noir produced by Wairarapa Vineyards too, which I enjoyed last night.
Good on you. Then Fing, David Williams, doesn't do much for kids' spelling, but apparently it's a good read. Third was Wonky Donkey, revived.
That is still,
yeah.
So that's been in the top in a number of different booksellers lists for all year.
Yes, I know, it's amazing.
Since that Scottish
granny
read it to her grandchild.
I know.
Will he become our most successful author soon?
Possibly. Internationally, I would say, got to be up there. High profile.
Yeah, as far as book sales and earning money.
Don't know about earning money. I think it's quite hard to earn money as a writer.
Yeah.
But those sales, those numbers are getting quite extraordinary.
Yes.
So,
yes. And still sells, and we get some more copies in, and they are out. And And then Diary of a Wimpy Kid, which is another franchise sort of thing that just keeps going and going and going. I don't know, can't remember what number they're up to. Non-fiction, Relax by Dr. McCarthy in Greytown? Featherston. South, anyway, is one of the best-selling ones in the first 6 months, which is about how to relax.
Are you good at that, Sue?
What's that?
Relaxing.
Yeah, I'm great. I'm terrific at
And
relaxing.
you read the book, so maybe,
No, I haven't. I don't need to.
I'm terrific at relaxing too. I don't need to.
No.
I find that really interesting. It says if that's the bestseller going out at Elmo's, that means there's a significant proportion of the population needing to read about how to relax.
But hopefully it's also a significant proportion of the population that are not being prescribed pills.
Okay. Yep.
So I look at it as a good thing.
Yeah.
Maybe it's the Wairarapa lifestyle, the chilled back, and that people want to get it validated, so I'll just read a book by a local.
Maybe you're right. Who can tell? Other ones, Wairarapa People and Place has been. That I don't know when that was published, but it's just Nicolaison's photographic record of the Wairarapa, and it's just anytime we get a quantity in, it just goes out. Books about native trees and native insects. Those little wee Andrew Crow, and I think is the author. More broadly, The Uninhabitable Earth, which is about climate change, by David Wallace Wells, and The Optimistic Child, which is about resilience in children, by David Seligman, have also sold well this year. So it's a mixed bag.
Mixed bag. Question: Lee Charles, he sells a book. I've always been curious, what percentage, just in broad terms, does the publisher get, and then what percentage does Lee get, and the bookseller? Roughly, how does that play? Or does it vary with each book, or is there a kind of a set formula?
I couldn't begin to tell you. It would depend on the publisher, on the bargaining power of the writer or the writer's agent. It would depend. The answer is it depends.
Okay, so it's variable. So, yeah. Okay.
And also Elmo's has got something coming up at the Winter Festival.
Part of the Heart of Winter Festival in Carterton. We have, during the school holidays in July, which I think start on the 8th or thereabouts, a series of events, afternoon events, with some of the local writers like Tanya Atkinson and Viv Walker, like Shirley Corlett from Masterton. And also we've invited my niece by marriage, Nikki Sievert, who's illustrated children's books previously and now has written and illustrated her own, called I Love Tomato Sauce. So look on our Facebook page for more information and for dates.
Thank you, Sue. Gareth, have you got anything to add generally into the mix?
No. I was curious about that book sale, second-hand book sale that you mentioned.
Yes.
What's the story behind that again?
Now, the Rotary is having its annual book sale in Carterton in the Event Centre the weekend of around about 13th of July, 14th of July. And I am in the process of decluttering my overcluttered bookcases with great, not happily.
Trepidation?
With trepidation. And there will, I have no doubt there will be regret. But I'm just very conscious of the needing to start clearing up and out as we get older.
You're making space for more books to come in.
Wow.
It works that way.
Yeah, so, and I think you can contact Rotary people to come and pick them up. I haven't got the details with me at the moment, but I'm sure that Steve at Elmo's will be able to tell you who to ring and what number to ring to get books picked up.
Yes, because I know nothing about Rotary matters. Can I just add a quick thing too?
Yes.
One of the things I've been reading, I finally got around to reading Educated by Tara Westover, which we have reviewed on this program. I can't recommend it too highly.
Well, and I think both Gareth and I would agree with that, because we both have read it and talked about it previously. It's an amazing book and very, very inspirational, and about resilience, which is what you talked about before, about love, education, meeting the right people at crucial moments to make a difference in your life, and
family.
It's about family,
and also and how we take health and safety legislation for granted. And that, and I mean, when you think that was happening, she was, the mother was producing herbal remedies and so on in their very, very unclean house for sale, And this was in the 90s, wasn't it? I mean, or even 2000s. And so, yes, I think it made me very thoughtful about health and safety.
Golly, they would go on long road trips in the middle of the night, having removed the seats of the car and never use a seatbelt.
That's right. There was so much was incredible.
And they had horrendous accidents.
Yeah. So, we will start today, unless anybody's got anything else. No news on the Wellington Public Library saga, Gareth?
I was in the Miramar Library on the weekend. I noticed that they have a long collection, or long form of shelves, which is a collection from the central library. So I think all the suburban libraries have been probably given this, and so they've gone through and picked the eyes out, and so of the very best they've got. So these have got into the suburban library. So that looked pretty good, and no doubt the longer hours in the suburbs helping. And I will be going and visiting the pop-up on Friday. So
that'll be interesting. So perhaps next month you can tell us about your experiences with the pop-up.
I hope it's good.
Right, thank you. Well, I think we'll start with today's ongoing program. And Gareth, you're going to be talking about The Mortal Boy by Fiona Kidman.
Right,
And so I think just if you put it up a little bit, please.
How is that?
That is brilliant.
Okay. Here I'm holding in my hand the 2019 Ockham.
I think Ockham.
Ockham, our leading fiction award book of the year by Fiona. Now, Fiona's written 30 books, poetry, non-fiction, novels. She's been a screenwriter. She's 84 years old and has produced a prize-winning book, and in fact there are two other prizes. I mean, she really is a star of our literary scene, and this is a particularly different book. Her other sort of historical fiction books have had a strong, I think, female readership theme to it, whereas this one is far more pitched at, I think, any interested New Zealander who wants to be plunged into the life of Albert Black, an immigrant young man from Ireland who comes out here as a 19-year-old, lands in Wellington, ends up in the Hutt Valley, Nainai sort of scene, which is of bodgies and woodgies and milk bars and juvenile delinquency, and which is absolutely shocking mainstream New Zealand. This behaviour of rampant sort of sex, drinking, and the country is morally sort of compromised by this activity.
Didn't that lead to an Education Review report with Mazemgard report?
Right.
Of all that misbehaviour that was going on?
We love a good outrage.
Yeah, we were the adults were not happy, and so what happened, the Mazemgard report was written and then actually posted to 300,000 New Zealand households to justify, just really take a stance against this, the youth, this delinquency that was apparently going to be the ruin of New Zealand. Anyway, our young man arrives into this and is getting used to living in New Zealand, travels to Auckland, gets in with the wrong crowd, and then in a sort of incident in a milk bar, the sort of cafe of the day, is in a sort of self-defense, ends up stabbing another young man, and ends up in court. And the story is well told, so we know how it's going to be resolved, which is going to be the execution 5 months later after he's found guilty of the second to last man or woman to be hung in New Zealand. And the book's a very holistic one. It looks at young Albert and his friends and his lovers and the mates that surround him, and then his family back at home, his island in Ireland, his mother who organises a huge petition in Ireland, and then is refused entry to come over here, and then there's the legal system of the lawyers, the judges, all kind of the jury, a sort of fictional range of characters who reflect all different things, and that's, I thought, was a terrific part of the book. And in the sort of New Zealand society, and it's really a little bit of a political statement against, and it doffs its hat to a man, Rolf Hannon, who was the Minister of Justice and who was against capital punishment. Jack Marshall figures in it, who I used to meet on occasions. I played basketball with his son Andy, and we would meet Jack at his home, and who was a military man and very much in favour of capital punishment, and is kind of comes across as in the wrong side of what is consequently played out. Challenging book. On a personal reader type approach to this book, it's a little pedestrian, not a book you rush to pick up, but there is a tale to be told, and it gradually works on you. And if it's our best book of the year, maybe I would reserve a little bit of judgment on that, but it's certainly it is an accolade to Fiona, to say, look, Eve, you have written a very competent book about a very timely topic. I mean, we are faced today with, like a criminal with the March incident, where most New Zealanders would probably be quite happy for capital punishment to be suddenly resurrected to handle Tarrant, and and we have state-sanctioned sort of SAS troops operating off, getting involved into very dark work. So the state is sort of moving in the sort of moral sort of area that's kind of challenging. And then the book is I think thought-provoking, and you've read it, so your take on it?
I have. I would agree that it's sort of meticulous, but it doesn't grab you.
The look on your face.
I know, but I do most of my reading in bed at night, or if it's really good, it's in the afternoon, and I put everything else aside. I wouldn't put everything aside for that, and I struggle to read it at night.
Unlike the book that you're going to talk about, yes.
I sort of felt duty-bound.
Anyway, The Mortar Boy, it's certainly on everybody's lists at the moment, as far as just for a whole lot of reasons. Second book, very short, very quickly, is Marion Porschman's book, The Pine Islands, which is a travel set off. He has a dream about his wife being unfaithful, and for some reason, irrationally, inexplicably, gets in a plane and flies to Tokyo, and at the airport buys a travel book of Basho's The Long Road to the North, and he suddenly discovers here's a way that he could be fulfilled to find a new beginning. But he falls in with another traveller, Yosa, who is a young man looking to end his life, and is carrying his book. He is carrying is the complete manual of suicide, and so the two of them now, one looking for the perfect end, one looking for the new beginning, move into a sort of fast disappearing Basho's Japan into this pilgrimage. And they written by Marion, who's a poet, and it was sort of Berlin's Book of the Year and shortlisted for the German Best Fiction. But since travel was on our theme, we're going to read you a couple of just one paragraph. The journey that serves to distance oneself from everything in order to get closer to something was nothing more than a contemplation of the space that resulted from the journey itself. A move that followed the explanation or the expansion of the mind in the space between here and there. While the mind itself, one truly hopes, would find peace, thoughts put themselves in order, the whirlwind of things slows down a little, finding its way back to a new, long-forgotten form, a place in which the vague and unknown that which is constantly changing, can be observed. One follows the subtle shifts, the illusionary imagery. One really hopes to become clearer about one's own self, that most elusive of things. The idea of what happens when we travel is sort of tucked away in this book, and the book is almost like a pile of pine needles kind of lying, and you walking over them and looking and finding your own patterns in them. Poetical book with a nice kind of tight little narrative that I think will find a readership in New Zealand.
Good.
That sounds very interesting, given that I will be travelling shortly, and very thought-provoking.
Right.
Thank you very much, Gareth. And next today is some music, although we could in fact have your big skies. Sue.
Well, before we get to there,
oh yes,
my nod to travel, which is the topic today, is a book I haven't read, but I really want to draw it to people's attention. Is that
perfect?
Right. It is the history of 100 years of the Tararua Tramping Club, first tramping club in the country. A weighty book, but beautifully. I mean, the photographs.
Oh yes,
beautiful.
Sorry,
Great history, and a trip down memory lane for anyone who's ever tramped or spent time in the Tararuas, I would imagine. There's some,
and
a local book.
I think it was reviewed on, there was an interview with the author, or one of the authors, on, was it Kim Hill on Saturday? Or
I don't hear Kim, but it's written by Sean Barnett and Chris McLean.
I mean, it means it's so topical, the fact that we've had this incident of the tramper lost.
Yes.
And the thought that we all sit and look up at the Tararuas, and to think that, there's a man lost, a man in danger, a man being searched for. And I got a feeling that...
not the first this year.
No, but I got a feeling that sort of story will probably be an endless sort of theme of the dangers and the problems that trampers have got into, and usually resolved, but tragically on some occasions not. And I will remember a neighbour taking up a group of students, and a young girl, and was in the middle of the group, but the group got slightly spread out. Everybody turned left on the track, and she walked down. They didn't realise till later the weather came down, and they lost her, and found her the next day. And just small incidents, which I'm sure are covered in there, but balanced by the thousands who tramp and enjoy it and have a wonderful time in the omnibus.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, though, that we do take this part of our environment, our country, for granted a bit. I mean, I'm from Taranaki, and people have been known to attempt to climb the mountain there in jandals, with no water.
Well,
and
I have seen them. I mean, I can remember being up there, and a guy in light summer clothes, no map, wandering around, and unbelievable.
But definitely, if tramping clubs are a safe place to explore.
And
our
great
wilderness.
for young ones. And I think, Gareth, one of your granddaughters goes out tramping up on the Tararuas.
Yeah, no, my oldest son is a head of outdoor education and has winter tramps all the time up there, but they have GPS locators, which they say today is sort of like an essential bit of gear, but these people are endlessly not going in up there.
But that was the bizarre thing about the recent missing person. No locator beacon, and supposedly somebody who was very experienced. It's a very odd...
It's not
sad.
It's a small bit of gear, but...
and easily hired.
Yeah, and it's all that stuff is slowly getting embedded into. It's like life jackets today. The new life jackets have little bits of technology in them. So you don't just buy something you strap on, you actually buy a life-saving sort of signal with it. And I think in the end that's how packs will be, or rucksacks will have that stuff in,
bedded in.
And it's just how technology will, hopefully make it safer for us.
Thank you, Sue. If you'd like to introduce us now to your big, your big read.
All right. Now, this Kate Atkinson, Big Sky. Big Sky, Big Sky. Are we there? Good. This is a Jackson Brodie story. It's been about 9 years since the last one, but Kate has not been asleep. She has produced a wonderful trio of books, Life After Life and A God in Ruins, companion books, and then more recently, only last year, Transcription. I really enjoy her writing. She's quirky, she's got a dry sense of humour. She mucks about with time, and it's not a linear passage with Kate Atkinson. But Jackson Brodie has been one of my heroes for a long time, because he's kind of not heroic. Things happen around him. He's a bit of a chaos causer in a way, but he gets through it. He's not scared of the physical stuff. Women find him dreadfully attractive, but he's not good at relationships. But nonetheless, he soldiers on. So 9 years after the last book, Jackson has moved to Yorkshire, near the coast, to be close to his son, Nathan, who's now 13 or 14, his son by Julia, which was one of his failed relationships. And Nathan comes with a dog, an ageing Labrador called Dido, Queen of Carthage. But also, in his personal life, his daughter Marley is about to be married, so that sort of frames the events within the book. Now, Jackson is ex-army, ex-police. He knows his way around policing and how to take care of himself. He's dogged. He never gives up. He doesn't forget anything. He's a Western music fan, got a good memory, he remembers things, he's compassionate, and I think devilishly attractive. Anyway, he's moved back, he set up his private investigation agency, and though he doesn't seem to attract many clients, he seems somehow to finance himself through life. But one of his clients is Crystal, not her real name. She suspects she's being followed and wants Jackson to check that out for her. Crystal lives in the leafy suburbs, married to a guy who runs a prosperous haulage company, but she has a dark and unfortunate past. She's a good mother to her stepson and also to her very small daughter, Candy, who's into everything pink. Jackson's feeling his age. His knees are starting to hurt when he goes for a run, and it's on one of his runs along the cliff top that he meets Vince, who is another link into the main subject of the story. Vince is being given the push by his wife Wendy after numerous years of marriage because she's had a better offer, and he's contemplating life and death on the edge of the cliff. Jackson, who's action man, throws himself at him and rescues him. And so the link between Crystal and Vince is not immediately obvious, but there are a number of other characters that finally you join up the threads to discover that there's a sordid child prostitution and human trafficking organisation at work in the leafy suburbs. But
it's getting dark all of a sudden.
It is, and there is a dark underbelly of Yorkshire apparently. That's historic. And Jimmy Savile The name
Was.
Jimmy Savile comes up in this book. Also, a name that comes up as a blast from the past for Jackson is the young girl who rescued him from a train wreck is now a policewoman. She's a detective constable, Reggie, and her partner, her work partner, her colleague, Ronnie, are known as the Cray twins in police circles. And they, in a disconnected way that Atkinson has, it all comes together at the end. All loose ends are tidied up, and you fall for it. Well, I did anyway. I think it's a very worthy successor to her previous books, and I hope, and I don't think it is the last of Jackson Brodie.
So there's 3 or 4 others?
Four previous ones. I can't remember all the names. So,
you'd rate this one on?
Well, it's so long since I've read one that I bought it for my birthday and had to spin it out over 3 nights. I was enjoying it so much. I had to stop myself from just reading.
Sign of a good book.
Yeah. I think she's great.
Yes, because I came in to Elmo's on the Sunday and you had started it the previous evening, having got home from...
I couldn't put it down.
And yes.
I had to make myself sort of go, put it down and go to sleep.
So, sign of a good book.
Yep.
Well, I think now is the time for some music, and I've chosen for today's music a track from this particular CD, Radosvov, which is, I'm not sure if that's pronounced correctly at all, but it's Slovakian. It's a Slovakian group that I actually heard when I was walking in Slovakia a few years ago. And since I will next be going into previous communist countries of Estonia, Lithuania and Latvia in 5 weeks' time, I thought it was appropriate to have this bit of music. So here we go. Welcome back, and to Book Lovers Corner from Arrow FM 92.7 FM. And I will now continue with the program with books that I have been reading. The first one I want to mention is The Lace Weaver by Lauren Chater. And it's set in Estonia in the Second World War, during the process, really, of the Second World War. And quite by chance, partly it's because when I've talked about my cycling adventures this year being in the Baltic States, a number of people have told me, "Oh, have you read The Lace Weaver?" So with that in mind, I got it out of the library. And quite by chance, another friend of mine from Westport, where I used to live, Rosvita, is currently over there at the moment. And she is visiting some of these places because her mother's family came from East Prussia, which was part of all this area, which also included part of Russia, what's currently Russia and what's currently Poland, currently Germany. It was an enormous, big area. And I recall vividly one book club meeting in Westport, where, because of the particular book we'd been reading, which is something like this, set in the Second World War, and she told us of her mother's journey from East Prussia, trying to get down to an area of safety, when she was hemmed in by the Russians on one side and the Germans on another side. And it was the most memorable storytelling. We were just absolutely captivated. And, there she is back with her siblings, revisiting parts of East Prussia where her mother and her grandmother, the family came from. And she actually it's called The Lace Weaver because the Estonia women did lace weaving. They lace weaved shawls, so the shawls of lace. And Rosvita has actually got an Estonian shawl, which this particular book is set on, the weaving of shawls, which has been handed down through the generations, and the challenges of keeping that particular cultural skill going when you have got the Soviets coming in during that time and wanting to get rid of anything that suggested to do with Estonia. They weren't allowed to speak the language. All the people who had any education or had land were fired over to the gulags, leaving a pretty decimated population who were just struggling to survive because they couldn't get jobs, they couldn't have food. It was a pretty dire situation. And so two strands to the story. One is of this family in a farming community in Estonia with the lace weaving as a central thread. Unintentional. Throughout, the other thread being a woman of Estonian motherhood but Russian fatherhood, who lived in seclusion and almost in captivity, but in sort of wealthy, well looked after captivity in Moscow. Now, it turned out she was in fact one of Stalin's offspring, but she didn't know it. She was told that she was in fact the daughter of this particular man, of a particular man who was in Estonia on service, and the person who was looking after her was called the uncle, but in fact wasn't an uncle. And so she got to the stage where she wanted to go to Estonia to find out her mother's roots, totally unaware of what was happening in Estonia or any of the Baltic states.
Bad time to make a
just
little exploratory journey like that. But
totally unaware, because there was no information in Russia about what was going on with the Russian army and the Baltic states.
Still, bad timing makes for good novels.
Absolutely bad timing. And so she went to find her father, who, of course, didn't exist there. But quite fortuitously, she met up with the woman who was the main protagonist in this farming family, who was trying to very illegally keep the lace making going. And the woman who came from Russia to find her father in Estonia actually was wearing a shawl that had belonged to her mother. And of course, the evidence of the shawl gave her a connection to this other woman. And so of that, you've got the two threads coming together, but you've also got the whole business of the Russian invasion, then the Germans coming in to Estonia.
So this is now 39...
This is 39, 40, I think the Russians came in, and then the Germans came up sort of in the mid-40s. And then the Russians came back in again. But because the Russians had been such a violent and disastrous invasion, because they'd lost so many of their people, they'd all been shipped out. They were looking forward to the Germans coming because they didn't think they could be as violent as the Russians. But little did they know, because of course that's when everybody who was a Jew and so on were taken. So there was, and they were rounded up at night time. They were just rounded up and shipped off. Not just the Jews, even just whole families for no apparent reasons. And so you get an enormous sense of they were literally between a rock and a hard place, and it didn't matter which way they went. You were likely to be shipped off to Siberia or killed. The value on human life seemed to be negligible.
It seemed, like the World War II, everybody on the borders, or the border countries to the major players was,
fair game.
Yeah, they were just getting rolled over. When you say Estonia, actually nothing comes to mind. I couldn't visualise. Is it a flat country?
Well, I think, yes, those
for
Baltic
your cycling,
states. Well, my understanding, and from what I've read so far, it's relatively flat. Okay. So that I'm looking forward to.
Right.
But that doesn't mean to say I'm not, in fact, investing in an e-bike while I'm doing my cycling. Sorry.
Tell us about without giving too much away, tell us something about how it ends.
It looked actually like a strong... Is it Lauren's Shater, yeah. I mean, in my mind, just listening to it, sounded like, is this a woman's book? That sounds like the main characters were women, even though I think you said there were a couple of soldiers who get swept up in the story.
Yes, well, the siblings of the boyfriend of the Russian woman, young Russian woman, and the siblings and cousins and male family members of the Estonian women all experienced diverse problems. Sort of they were either killed or they were shipped off, or some of them they ended up actually going to fight in the forest.
As a sort of a resistance,
like a partisan group, a resistance group, and it doesn't end up well.
Okay.
And so I started reading it with hesitation, and it is grim. However,
I'm glad there's a however.
Yeah.
A different story I've also got, because it's very appropriate, Andres Aps's Odyssey. It's called Odyssey and Images, an Illustrated Biography. Now, he is a famous New Zealand landscape artist, and there are books of his...
Photographer.
What did I say? Photographer, I meant. Books of his are in Elmo's. Well, he grew up in Latvia, and this book is a story of his father's journey. Now, his father, Valdemars Aps, had actually kept a diary from a very young age, but he also wrote letters to Andres's mother, who kept the letters.
Okay.
And so so you've got sort of original, going back to the 1939s, 40s, you've got evidence of what was happening at that time. So while The Lace Maker was fictional, this is, real life. And Valdemars, Andres's father, was in the Latvian army. He was caught up by the Russians coming in and required to be part of the Russian army, and for the first part of which he was allowed to wear the Latvian uniform, but then he had to change to a Russian uniform. And then the Germans came in, and he was required to join the German. He was incarcerated in Russia at one stage. Then he had to join the German army and was walking back and forth down to Germany and back up to Latvia. Extraordinary tales. And he met up with Andres's mother, and they obviously clicked, formed a relationship, got married, and in very short intervals of time they got together. It was trying to maintain develop a relationship, let alone maintain it, during those years was very, very difficult. And it got to the stage where it looked like Valdemars, Andres's father, had been killed. There was no way he could have survived, given, and they were being shipped off to, when the Russians re-invaded, being shipped off and to gulags and so on, which in fact did happen to Valdemars. So, because of the Germans, Andres and his mother ended up down in Germany in a Latvian sort of transitional camp sort of thing. And while they were there, New Zealand Foreign Affairs came and said they could go to New Zealand. So they said the possibility was Canada or Australia or New Zealand. New Zealanders got in first, and they in fact came to New Zealand. And you get the story of how difficult it was, and very pertinent in today's world, what it's like to arrive in a country where you don't know the language. The culture is so different. And yet how inspiring it is that he has, out of nothing really, and created a significant life which he's contributed to New Zealand. Yeah. And his mother married a Latvian here. Unfortunately, it was he was a very violent character, which meant that Andres had to fend for himself from a very young age, really. So it's a very powerful story from that perspective, and it's told, in original words. But then in 1990, once the Soviet era was, with glasnost, was actually, things were becoming open, Latvians were coming out to New Zealand, and presumably to Canada and Australia and so on, to find relatives. And one woman came out that Andres's mother, Millie, had known through the camp, that transitional camp in Germany. And when she went back to Latvia, she looked for their family, their relatives, and found out that, in fact, Valdemar's, her husband, Andres's father, was still alive. He had thought they were dead, and he had remarried. And it's just a very, very powerful story. They went back to Latvia, and how wonderful it was for Andres to find a family when he had lived without one, and for his mother the challenges of meeting your love of your life all those years on, but not being able to really bridge the gap because so much had happened in between times.
Wow.
But it's told with a lot of photos of Andres's famous landscape photography.
How did you come by that book?
Well, when I lived down on the coast and was very involved with the West Coast Blue Penguins group and setting up the trust and so on, which was a very, very exciting decade, and it still is ongoing, not my involvement, but the trust and the research they're doing with penguins. We used to have annual meetings, and we'd hold them at different parts of the coast so people could be involved. And one particular year we had it down at Okorito, where Andres actually lives. And so he came to the meetings and we talked, so I was inspired by what I'd read of him and heard of him from that. And so I bought a copy.
Good.
So the story that is in fact true to me sounds almost more fictional than the fictional story.
Well, it just shows you what goes on in these when countries are caught between rock and hard places. And I mean, that's happening today. And you're looking at all the people who are travelling around the world trying to find a safe place to live, and their treatment, their appalling treatment. What would you do to survive?
And your opinion of the lace weaver?
Worthwhile reading to make us very thankful that we live in a country with no borders with other countries. We live in a country where we have freedom of speech, freedom of movement, freedom of association, all these things that we take for granted. And it makes you just be thoughtful about what we take for granted.
Right.
And I think every so often it is worthwhile just to,
good to
check that up.
There seems to be I don't know, Simone, you could comment on this, a real flood of books at the moment with this World War II setting and its influence on, millions of people, and there are just, the stories just never stop. Do you think it's a historical thing? Like a lot of these people who were at that time are getting at their end of their lives, and authors are writing this, or are these terrific stories?
I think a bit of both, probably.
I think a bit of both, but also, thirdly, there's enough distance now for people to tell stories without the heartbreak, perhaps.
And also, in these troubled times, perhaps writers think there are lessons to be learnt. Don't forget.
Yeah, and I think that's true too, and which is why I think it's worthwhile reading.
Has that author written anything else?
Is the prose style like?
Oh, the prose style is easy to read. Very, very easy to read.
Because I haven't really heard too much
I think this is her first book.
One and only. Published when? Do you know?
Published last year.
Oh, okay.
Haven't seen it on any sort of,
No, it's only because I've talked about travelling to Estonia that people have said, but people have, friends around the country have been reading it.
Yeah, okay, so it sounds like one of these word of mouth ones where, people get introduced it that way.
Now, I think we've time to very quickly, now, if you could show it up nearer to, yes.
Okay, the first book we looked at was This
you.
Mortal Boy by Fiona Kidman, Book of the Year, and you can get it at Elmo's, of course, and it's a great story, and the writing for a woman of age is very commendable.
Oh, thank you.
Second one, a much
Dangerous comment to make in this company.
second one, a much younger woman, Marion, a poet, a German poet, has decided to write a novel, and it's, I think will find a readership of people who like sort of a mix of travel and Japanese settings, and quite an interesting prose style that a poet brings to her work.
Thank you, Gareth. Sue.
Okay, I talked briefly, and we talked more about Leading the Way, the history of the Tararua Tramping Club, which is a beautiful book. Lots of stories, lots of trips down memory lane, I would think, for families that were involved, and a good price at Elmo's, $14.99.
Pardon?
$49.99.
Thank you.
$14.99. Whoops.
Thank you.
You will have two at that price.
Yeah, I would do. And Big Sky by Kate Atkinson, the latest in the Jackson Brodie series. And I just say that YouTube, source of all things good, has the Jackson Brodie TV programs on them.
Oh,
So
goody.
they have been.
They have, with
adapted.
Jason Isaacs as Jackson Brodie, and I think he's perfect. See what you think.
Great.
Would they be on Netflix, or would they
No,
be
YouTube.
YouTube has the
YouTube.
whole
Oh,
Yep.
YouTube is amazing.
YouTube is amazing.
bit of a mystery to me.
Yeah.
Go on. Well, bits of it are not, so mysterious.
And my books were The Lace Weaver by Lauren Chater, which is a good check on what we take for granted in our life, and it's based in Estonia during the war and the challenges of surviving or mostly not surviving it. And Andrus Aps's, it's so big, I can't get it on. Andrus Aps's An Odyssey, an illustrated biography with photographs by Andrus Apps himself, a well-known New Zealand landscape photographer, and text by Ron Crosby, based on letters and diaries of the participants, which is Andrus's himself, his father, and his mother. So thank you, folks. We look forward to seeing you next month in July, and we will. So thank you, Gareth. Thank you, Sue.
Thank you.
Thank you.